So this is our weekly rankings where we run through our top 10 rankings as well as the biggest movers from the past week. The full rankings are available on our Twitter at BashBrosBall, or they'll be shown on screen partway through the YouTube video. So I'm going to say a little preamble before this week's rankings because I feel like I had a bit of a change of heart over this past week. And just the inconsistencies of the ACC and like middle of the pack SEC teams have just really put me down in a bog. They seem like they have a really good weekend and should be ranked one week, and so we've put them in, and then the next week just absolutely flop. So I feel like from my side, I want to give more credit to the teams that have consistently won their series, even if they're in a conference that hasn't necessarily have the top competition. But when you're putting together consistent week in, week out performances, that's tough to do no matter what conference you're in. And putting those guys in the rankings is definitely something that should be done. And instead of these ACC and SEC teams that are winning at home and then potentially getting swept on the road like we've seen so many times this year. So I feel like we've got to give like the little guys or just the teams from the smaller conferences, even I guess the Big Ten, since they kind of have been shorted out of a lot of rankings, even though I guess they're considered a Power 5 conference. Baseball has a little bit been lacking this year, and I'd just rather see some of those teams in instead of those mid-tier ACC and SEC teams that we've seen previously.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we also have a couple big movers this weekend that you wouldn't normally expect, but that's just due to last weekend everybody lost, and so there was certainly some teams heading into this week that were overvalued as well as some teams that were undervalued, and we sort of adjusted accordingly after this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. I guess we can get into it now with number one. A lot of drum rolls here. It's a surprise team at number one, Tennessee. Who would have thought? They stay at number one. They had a dominant week once again, coming back, and there's no question that they are the most dominant team in college baseball. No questions asked.
Yeah, I mean, they played well against Florida on the road. Florida certainly a talented squad and did give them a little run for their money on the Saturday and Sunday, but overall, Tennessee had the series in the bag and had that incredible comeback on Sunday, and yeah, just continue to be the most dominant team in baseball, like you said.
Yeah, and continuing from that, I feel like you'd have to see them get swept, which doesn't look likely at all for Oregon State at number two to even have a chance of competing for that number one spot. So even though Oregon State has been extremely consistent, there is just a huge gap, and that is seen in the number of losses that are different between the two teams.
Yeah, Oregon State only has one series loss on the year, and we're still waiting for Tennessee to have one series loss to even enter that discussion. And like you said, it'd probably have to be a sweep for us to discuss Oregon State jumping them. Series loss probably won't cut it. And yeah, that's why you have Oregon State slotted two there.
Yeah. Once again, they are also a team that we didn't move at all from last week, so no surprises there. But at number three, we do have a mover. Miami jumping 2 spots. They had a good weekend while teams around that area had a bit of struggles, but Miami has shown consistency in a very inconsistent ACC, and even though they've had a few down weeks, they've proved that they are the class of the conference.
Yeah, Miami continues to play well, and like you said, with both Arkansas and Oklahoma State slipping ahead of them and dropping one each, that opens the door for Miami up into that number 3 spot.
Yeah, so like you said, we have Arkansas now at number 4 and Oklahoma State at number 5, dropping 1 spot each from the previous 3 and 4. So both of those teams struggled a bit this past weekend. We still think there's probably, I'd say, a pretty relatively big-sized gap between those like top 5 teams and the next bout, but that could definitely change after this weekend's games.
Yeah, little blip in the resume for Arkansas and Oklahoma State, but both have been consistent for most of the season, and we both know that they're both extremely talented and have high ceilings and are ultimately most likely Omaha teams in most people's predictions right now. So, yeah, that's why you see them staying at 4 or 5 after losing the weekend.
Yeah, and then at number 6 is Texas. They're also a team that didn't move at all. They had a great weekend, but I think we just didn't think it was necessary for them to jump either Arkansas or Oklahoma State at this point. Obviously, this could change with time, but I just feel like the resume and the overall talent that Arkansas and Oklahoma State have shown at this time is better than what Texas has put on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough spot there. Not quite enough to jump Arkansas or Oklahoma State. But like you said, we got an upcoming series. Oklahoma State heading to Texas for that 5-6 matchup. We'll talk more about it later, but opportunity for both teams to jump there.
Yeah, huge opportunity to solidify where they are in the rankings. But now we can move on to number 7 with Notre Dame also jumping up one spot. They came back, like we said earlier. There've been a few ups and downs on that roller coaster, but they're consistently showing that they are probably the second best team in the ACC, and that's why we decided to jump them up to number 7.
Yeah, Notre Dame likely would have found themselves further down the rankings last week if it weren't for everybody in the rankings losing. But this weekend, they right the ship and sweep Wake Forest, and the offense goes ballistic. So that's why you see them moving back up. They're looking more like that team we had them slotted at earlier.
Yeah, this week was definitely a lot easier to evaluate the rankings just because most of the teams that we had previously ranked did win their weekend series, and the few teams that didn't, we could just easily drop and didn't really have to think about the majority of the consequences from that. But following that up, we have 3 other teams back to back rising one spot, with Southern Miss at 8, Stanford at 9, and finishing out the top 10 with Gonzaga. So lovely to see a few mid-majors popping up in the top 10. We had one last week with Southern Miss at 9, but now getting Gonzaga in there also is good to see, and they're getting healthier as the season goes on right now. So pick and choose any of those teams, and they all look dangerous.
Yeah, all 3 teams have been playing really well as of late, continue to win their weekend series. Gonzaga gets Will Kempner back here soon, so that's going to be big for them on the pitching rotation. And yeah, all 3 of those teams are looking very scary heading into the last stretch of the year.
For sure. And then with the biggest movers, we can start off with the biggest mover who was already ranked from last week, and that was Auburn moving up 8 spots from 25 to 17. At this point, there are a lot of other SEC teams right around there in the rankings, but we just thought how it played out and how Auburn has gotten hot as of recent, we thought that they would deserved to jump a few of the other SEC teams around that area and be at that number 17 spot.
Yeah, like you said, the SEC is absolutely jumbled in the middle to top area there, and Auburn just has the head-to-head on those teams right below them, so it made sense to jump them a little more than you may expect.
Definitely. And then the biggest dropper of the week is Texas Tech. Now, they didn't have an awful weekend. They went 2-2 and won their weekend series against West Virginia, but they have just been not great as of recent. So their continued somewhat struggles are what has made them really drop. We barely dropped them last week, but we said that if these struggles somewhat continued, then there would be further punishments, and that's kind of what you're seeing here.
Yeah, tough to punish a team who wins their weekend series, but dropping the midweek was just costly for the rankings here because we kind of just had to compensate for not moving them down last week at all. Other teams behind them played better this weekend, and Texas Tech didn't necessarily show that they were playing that much better, so that's why you see them dropping.
Right. Last week it seemed like there were a bunch of top-tier teams, and then when those top-tier teams fell out and lost their series or got swept like we saw, it kind of evened out the playing field. So we saw that gap kind of disappear, and with that, the teams that played a lot better this weekend jumped some of the teams that didn't.
That's exactly right.
Sweet. And then the teams coming into the rankings were Texas A&M jumping to the number 19 spot. That was the highest of the teams joining the rankings this week. We also had Wofford getting their representation shown at number 23. Number 24 with Maryland. Got to get those Big Ten teams in just because they have shown that they can get to a Omaha if they're able to put a streak together. And then 25 Georgia Southern, another mid-major jumping in instead of a more established team that we've seen previously.
Yeah, and similar to Auburn, the reason you see Texas A&M jump up there is they've been hot as of late, first of all, but once again they have the series win over LSU, and that's why we got them slotted a spot above them there. That's why you see the big jump. But
For
definitely
sure.
good to see these mid-majors coming in here. Got to give some love to the little guys.
Yeah, for sure. I think they deserve their props. And another team that jumped up a few spots, that jumped a lot of the teams that had good weekends, but we thought TCU still deserved to be mentioned and have a big jump because they were able to take down a top-tier team away from home, with TCU now jumping to 11, jumping up 4 spots from last week, and getting ahead of Texas Tech, which I think is deserved just based off of what they did to them a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's been hard to jump TCU the last couple weeks, but as we stated earlier, 6-3 the last 3 weekends against top 10 teams. That's why you see them jumping up to that 11 spot. Finally got them the recognition they deserve.
Yeah, and with a team being that hot, they've gotten through the tough part of their schedule, so they really just want to rack up wins now. So now finishing out our ranking section, we'll just go through the teams that dropped out. There were 4 this week. The top team was number 18, Oregon. They dropped out, had a bad weekend at home against Wazoo. If you're fighting for a Pac-12 title, you really can't have those slip-ups, and we saw that there. Also have Georgia Tech, who is also similarly riding that roller coaster, a bit more on the downward trend than Notre Dame is. And then also another ACC team with Florida State doing the same thing up and down every other week. At home, they do well. Away, it seems like they're just not hitting those marks. And then finishing it off, the team that was number 24, GCU, then also dropping out. If they just had a little bit better of a week, or we had ranked a little bit higher previously, I think they would have stayed in. But unfortunately, being ranked 24 doesn't really give you that margin for error that other teams have.
Yeah, all 4 of those teams are extremely dangerous and certainly talented, but just didn't play their best baseball this past weekend, and that's why you see them dropping out.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, we would really appreciate a like and subscribe for more weekly college baseball content.